You're going to die.
Almost
You're going to die. You're going to die. You're going to die. You're going to die. You're going to die.
Welcome back, gals and pals. Today we're diving into the chilling and disturbing world of the 2022 horror movie Smile. So buckle up, because this ride is filled with tons of creepy vibes, lots of cheap jump scares, and you guessed it, smiles. So let's get into it. Our movie kicks off with an introduction to our main character, of course, whose name is Dr. Rose Cotter, a therapist who works at an emergency psychiatric hospital. We get a brief scene of Dr. Rose Cotter's mom, who is, taking a permanent nap in a room that looks like they went a little too hard the night before. Rose then wakes up, revealing that this is just a dream. Sleeping on the job, eh? Ooh, I'm telling.
Oh, I'm telling.
Dr. Rose Cotter then meets with one of her patients, whose name is Carl. He is suffering from a manic episode and just spiraling hard, bro. Like, hard. He's constantly muttering that everyone's gonna die and that nobody matters. So basically me every day. Rose then admits him into the psychiatric wing of the hospital where she works. She then briefly meets with her boss, whose name is Dr. Morgan, aka Kumar, from Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle. So it turns out that he did become a doctor after all. Good for you, Kumar. Good for you. Dr. Rose Cotter then intakes another patient who is actually a PhD student by the name of Laura Weaver. Laura tells Dr. Rose Cotter that she recently witnessed her professor take his own life. He did this by bludgeoning himself to death with a claw hammer. Hammer time, baby. Hammer time, baby. Hammer time, baby. It's crazy, bro. It's crazy. Laura tells Dr. Cotter that she is being terrorized and followed by an invisible entity that only she can see. It appears as different smiling people, and it has told her that today is the day she is going to die. Terrifying. Literally so terrifying. Of course, Rose, being a doctor, just assumes that Laura is having hallucinations, but Laura then says that the entity has shown up and begins screaming and panicking. This prompts Rose to call for help. We then see Laura suddenly become completely calm, and she smiles at Rose. She does this right before she fatally slits her own throat using the shards of a nearby shattered vase. She does this all while maintaining the same eerie smile, and obviously this leaves Dr. Cotter completely terrified and extremely traumatized. Honestly, after dealing with this patient, I would think Dr. Rose Cotter might just need a therapist herself, but we'll get into that soon enough. Rose then goes home and attempts to have a wine to relax, where she begins having visions of Laura Weaver smiling at her. It's very scary. We then see her boyfriend, who is the A-Train, who is on break from filming his hit show, The Boys.
I'm A-Train!
And he comes into her house with such blinding speed that it frightens her.
Did I scare you?
Causing her to drop her wine and shatter the glass. But in all actuality, he's actually her fiancé, whose name is Trevor. The next day, Rose is checking in on her patient, Carl. Carl smiles at Rose the exact same way that Laura did, and begins yelling at Rose that she is going to die.
You're going to die.
Honestly, this scene was great. Rose then calls the staff to help restrain Carl, only to realize that Carl has basically been asleep the entire time. And this begins Rose's descent into madness, where every time someone smiles at her, she goes from nervous to terrified, and the movie sort of turns into a game of, try not to smile, but with significantly higher stakes. So, will Rose win a prize? Or will she just end up in the loony bin? Who knew that smiling could be the ultimate horror weapon? Concerned for Rose's mental well-being, her supervisor, Dr. Morgan, aka Dr. Kumar, orders Rose to take a paid week off, and wouldn't that be nice, fam? A paid week off. Like, shit. Man, maybe all we need to do is start tripping out at work and saying that there's an invisible entity following us around. No, I'm kidding. Do not do that. Don't do it. Just don't do it. Rose's hallucinations continue to worsen, causing her fiancé Trevor to believe that she could possibly be a danger to herself. Rose, who is clearly a fan of the channel, decides to take my advice, and she visits her own therapist, whose name is Dr. Madeline. Madeline suggests that Rose's problems could stem from her childhood, in which she witnessed the overdose and the death of her mother, which obviously left her quite traumatized. So an unhealed trauma type of moment type situation. A bit later in the movie, Rose attends a birthday party for her nephew, where she has bought him an electric train as a present. But when her nephew goes to unwrap his present, he finds that it's actually Rose's unalived cat. It's not good. It's not good. Which has somehow replaced the train that she got him as a present, and naturally this horrifies everyone at the party. Rose then has a public breakdown at the party where she begins having visions of a woman who is just eerily smiling at her. This causes her to panic and ultimately trip and fall backwards into a glass coffee table, and she injures herself pretty bad. This basically is the moment where Rose is convinced that there actually is an entity following her around. Rose then discovers that Laura Weaver's professor was actually smiling at her right before his death, so she decides to pay a visit to the professor's widow, whose name is Victoria. Victoria explains to Rose that her husband had been having visions of various people who were all smiling the same way.
So I am the villain.
Victoria then tells Rose that her husband had also saw someone die by taking their own life shortly before he did the same thing. Rose, who is seeking more information on the professor's visions, asks her ex-boyfriend, Joel, who happens to be a police officer and a detective, to dig up and go through some old police records. They find several connecting cases of people who all witnessed someone take their own life while smiling at them, shortly before doing the same thing to themselves within the same week. So basically it's a you will die in 7 days situation type moment. Shout out The Ring, video coming soon on that one. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. Digging into the police records, Rose and Joel eventually discover an exception in the chain of deaths, which lead them to a convicted murderer whose name is Robert Talley. Rose then explains to Joel her theory on the evil entity that has been jumping from person to person, ultimately causing their deaths, feeding off of trauma. Joel actually believes her and decides that he's going to help her. Rose and Joel then pay a visit to Robert Talley in prison, where he tells them that the entity feeds on trauma, and that the only way to escape it is to brutally kill someone else in front of another witness in order to traumatize them, passing the curse to the witness of the brutal murder. Rose, of course, gets upset and rejects this idea, which causes the inmate Robert to traumatically break down in fear, knowing that she is infected with the entity. The entity. So scary, bro. We then see Rose in her home, where the entity appears as her therapist, Madeline. The entity disguised as Madeline then eerily smiles at Rose and tells her that it's almost time.
Almost time, Rose.
And I'm not gonna lie, this was one of the most visually disturbing scenes in a horror film that I've seen in a really long time. Like, real talk fam, this was a really good scene and it is legit very creepy. We then see Rose drive to the hospital where she works with a Michael Myers type knife, and she uses it to murder her patient Carl right in front of her boss, Dr. Morgan, aka Kumar. Shout out Harold and Kumar. But this is soon revealed to be just a hallucination. Would you guys attempt to break the chain of the smile entity by brutally murdering someone in front of a witness? Or would you just continue the cycle of death? Let me know down below in the comments section. I would literally just poop my pants on a continuous cycle until I expired, so just never-ending poops. We then see Rose wake up in her car and that her boss, Dr. Morgan, aka Kumar, is standing right outside of her car. He notices that Rose has a knife. Dr. Morgan, aka Kumar, calls the police on Rose and then takes a quick trip to the nearby White Castle. Rose then decides to drive to her abandoned family home, because everyone in a horror film has to have an abandoned family home in the countryside somewhere. And she realizes that she cannot pass on the entity's curse if she dies alone, and there's no one nearby to witness any trauma. While she's in her abandoned family home, we see the entity appear as Rose's deceased mother, and it is also revealed that Rose chose not to call for help for her mother because of her abusive behavior and her drug abuse. So it's kind of a full circle moment, which is kind of mid and not super relevant to the story plot, but that's okay. That's okay. We realize that Rose has been very traumatized the entire time. We then see the entity attack Rose. It's insanely scary. The entity now appears as a monstrous version of her deceased mother. Honestly, they did an amazing job on this scene. Like, the entity and the monstrous version of her mother is actually very unsettling and very creepy. However, Rose realizes that the entity attacks using her own mind as a weapon. So she pulls a Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, and claps back at the entity, hitting it in the head with a lantern. This lights the monstrous entity on fire, as well as the house, which seems to kill the entity. Rose then dips out and flees the home and makes a return to her ex-boyfriend Joel's apartment. Joel and Rose begin to reconcile their differences. Before we get a plot twist, Joel smiles at Rose, causing Rose to realize that this is just another hallucination. She runs outside of the apartment and finds that she is still outside of her abandoned family home. And bruh, this entity is straight up gasoline gas. For being able to manipulate people using their own minds, like, it's straight gasoline, fam. In all actuality, Joel has managed to track Rose's phone to her abandoned family home and finds her outside. Rose, not wanting to spread the trauma to Joel, panics and runs back inside her home. It is at this moment that the entity reveals its true form, which is honestly one of the best designed monsters I've seen in a horror film. I don't know, maybe ever, to be honest. Like, it's very cool. It's very cool. It's a skeletal and skinless monster with multiple sets of like crazy jaws that are forming, you guessed it, one big smiling mouth. This is some real Silent Hill type shit. It's honestly horrifying. The sight of the entity's true form causes Rose to freeze in fear, and the entity then possesses her by forcing itself into her body through her mouth. And this was another really good scene and had some over-the-top creepy visuals. It's honestly great. Joel manages to break down the front door of Rose's house, where he comes across a smiling Rose who is now cooked. Literally, she is now covered in gasoline and she lights herself on fire. We then zoom in on Joel's eyes, which widen in fear. So this lets us, the audience, know that the trauma and the curse has now been passed on to Joel. So he is now infected with the entity, and then fade to black. The movie ends. The movie ends. So, was Smile worth watching? I liked it, so I would say yes. This movie had plenty of jump scares, which I always enjoy in horror movies because I'm basic and I like getting scared and jumping out of my seat. And I actually really like the way that they executed the entity as a monster that feeds on trauma. Not to mention its legitimate horrifying appearance was really fun. It also had a very well-known cast that all did an amazing job acting, which really helped with the overall, serious and psychological tone of the movie. However, I will say that the pacing was a bit slow at times. When they were building up the characters and kind of showing some of their previous traumas. But overall, it wasn't too bad. If you like more psychological and creepy horror films, you will definitely enjoy this movie, and I would say you should give it a watch. There's a reason there's a sequel, am I right? Which, funny enough, should release in theaters the same day that this video is going up. So, smile! Smile. All right, that wraps up this video. Thank you all so much for watching. I truly appreciate each and every one of you's support. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave it a like and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. I upload new videos just like this every week. Much love to you all, and I will see you in the next one. Peace. Peace, peace, peace.